It's Jen with PolarPro, and I've got the new GoPro Hero8 Black. Today we're going to walk through the settings and set up the camera to make sure you're getting the best looking footage possible. So in video mode, when I go into my presets, you'll see that I already have 4 that I've created. These are the 4 different settings that I'm going to use the most, and presets are helpful because they allow me to jump between each of the customizations instantly without having to go through and tweak each individual setting. But we're going to want to set these up so that they're ready for the situations that we want them for. So I'm going to go in to edit my first preset. Choosing your resolution and frame rate mainly depends on what you're going to be doing with the footage. I usually try to set the resolution as high as possible, so right now this setting is at 4K 30. If I know I'm going to be slowing down the footage in post, and I would want to move more into 120 or 240 frames per second, then I'm going to be moving down the resolution to allow for that higher frame rate. I'm going to keep the lens at wide. The other option that often works well is linear because it takes away some of that fisheye look that GoPros often have. That just really comes down to preference and what you're going to be shooting. Hyper smooth I'm going to keep on. If you know you're going to be doing a lot of movement, you might want to move into high or even look at boost. Just know it's going to crop in your image a little bit. Low light and zoom aren't an option in this setting, and we aren't going to be using any clips from this. So now we'll move down into Protune, starting with your bit rate. And that's really the amount of information that you're wanting to get out of the camera. The downside of using a higher bit rate is that it takes a lot more space on your SD card. So make sure if you're wanting the best looking footage possible, you have a large enough card to accommodate bigger files. Now for shutter speed, we want to follow the 180 rule, which is keeping your shutter at double the frame rate for the most natural looking motion blur. Since I'm shooting right now in 30 frames per second, I'm going to want to keep my shutter at 1/60. And oftentimes that's not going to be a problem, but sometimes if you're shooting in very bright conditions, your image is at risk of being overexposed. Maybe the sun is too bright or there's a lot of reflections casting light into your image. And it's tempting to crank down that shutter speed to compensate for the overexposure. But what ends up happening is you lose that natural looking motion blur and your image can end up looking jittery. A way to fix this is to use an ND filter, which PolarPro provides, allowing you to keep your shutter speed at double your frame rate, even in the brightest conditions. When it comes to white balance, don't leave it on auto and trust the camera to make the best decision for your scene. You're the one in control and you want the best looking footage. So go ahead and customize your white balance, choose if you want it to be warmer or cooler depending on your shot. And since we know this is a setting that we're probably going to go back to more often, we're actually going to make this an on-screen shortcut, which we'll come back to in a second. When looking at ISO, which is the artificial light, I've put my minimum down at 100, but I put my maximum at 200. This is a similar situation to the white balance, where if you leave that gap really large, the camera will be deciding mid-shoot, mid-scene, what the best lighting should be, and you're the one who wants to make that decision. So I've kept that window really small. If you want, you can even leave your minimum and your maximum at 100, and know that all the other settings that you're choosing are going to decide the lighting exposure for the scene, not the ISO. On our last 4 settings, we've got sharpness, which I'm leaving at low. You always have the option to add more sharpness in post, but if you bake it into the original footage and it doesn't turn out well, it's really hard to remove. There's 2 options for color. You can choose GoPro's coloring or a more flat neutral color profile, which we're going to want to give us more dynamic range and more options for coloring in post. And then we're going to keep our audio at low and our wind at auto. Some of these just come down to preference. Test them out for your scene and see what's going to work best. So at the bottom of the settings menu, you have the option for on-screen shortcuts. You can choose up to 4 settings that you know you're going to want to come back to and change the most frequently. So I've gone with shutter, white balance, lens, and hyper smooth. Now that I've finished setting up that preset, I'm going to repeat the process for each of the others. And most of the settings are going to be the same. The only things that are changing are the resolution, the frame rate, and then the shutter speed. And those are our favorite settings on the new GoPro Hero8 Black for the best looking footage. If you have any questions or want to know more about the theory behind a setting, go ahead and drop a comment below. We'd love to tell you more and maybe even make a video about it. Until then, go out and capture some great looking footage with your new Hero8 Black.